The morning sun bathed the small town courthouse in a soft golden light, reflecting off the polished wooden doors and tall windows. Inside, the building hummed with quiet anticipation. Lawyers hurried along the hallways, their briefcases bouncing lightly against their knees, papers rustling like whispered secrets. Bailiffs moved in measured steps, the clack of their shoes echoing against the marble floors. Journalists adjusted cameras and microphones, whispering last-minute notes into their recorders, while spectators found their seats, murmuring among themselves in a symphony of curiosity and tension. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee, old wood, an Inca scent that seemed to belong to legal battles and secrets, waiting to be revealed. Amid this human tide, one small figure stood out, an unlikely presence in a place so serious. A toddler, barely 2 years old, perched on her mother's hip, her small fingers clutching a soft stuffed bunny. Her wide eyes darted around the high-ceilinged courtroom, fascinated by the towering judge's bench, the polished podiums, and the rows of wooden chairs filled with attentive spectators. Her tiny feet swung lightly, brushing against the air, oblivious to the formalities surrounding her. For her, the courthouse was less a place of judgment and more a vast playground filled with strange shapes, sounds, and people. Her mother, a calm woman in her early 30s, navigated the small child through the crowd with practiced ease. She whispered reminders to keep quiet, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's face. The toddler's curiosity, however, could not be contained. She clutched her bunny tightly as she peered around, captivated by the peculiar, almost ceremonial atmosphere. Her attention soon landed on an unusual figure at the front of the room, a police officer seated near a large, imposing dog, its coat glossy and well-groomed. The dog's posture was regal, sitting upright with ears perked, eyes scanning the room with alert precision. It was a K-9 unit, trained for detection and obedience, a silent guardian whose presence commanded respect. The toddler's eyes widened as she observed the dog. She had seen animals before, of course, but never one like this, so calm, so poised, yet clearly capable of action. She leaned slightly forward, tugging gently at her mother's sleeve, whispering, "Doggy?" in a tiny voice. Her mother smiled, adjusting her hold on the child and whispering back, "Yes, sweetie, that's a police dog. Be gentle, okay?" But the toddler's fascination was already deepening. She tilted her head, studying every movement, every twitch of the dog's ears, every flick of its tail. The courtroom itself seemed to pulse with tension, a living organism of seriousness and anticipation. Lawyers adjusted their ties, flipping through folders thick with evidence. The judge, an imposing figure with salt and pepper hair and a voice that carried authority, shuffled papers before the bench. Spectators murmured quietly, speculating about the case's outcome. No one noticed, at first, the little girl in the crowd. She was easy to overlook, a tiny bubble of innocence amidst a sea of adults weighed down by responsibility, worry, and expectation. But the toddler was not one to be ignored. Her attention, once fixed on the police dog, began to manifest in small, subtle gestures. She pointed with a chubby finger, her eyes locking onto the K9, as if trying to communicate something no adult could yet understand. The mother, glancing down, noticed the intensity in her child's gaze. "Sweetie, just be quiet for a little while," she whispered. But the toddler's fascination seemed to override any sense of decorum. She leaned closer, her mouth slightly open, murmuring sounds that barely reached anyone's ears. Meanwhile, the police officer adjusted his uniform, eyes occasionally flicking to the dog as it sat alert. The dog was well trained, a silent partner capable of detecting substances or signals far beyond human capability. Today, it was here for routine courtroom presence, a precautionary measure in a case that had drawn attention due to its sensitive nature. Nobody expected the toddler to notice anything significant. To most, she was just a child, innocent and unaware. A tiny figure that could be easily overlooked in a room filled with adults focused on serious matters. Yet, as the trial began and the courtroom settled into an uneasy rhythm of proceedings, the toddler's interest only grew. Her tiny hand continued to point subtly at the police dog. She whispered incoherent words, her voice barely above a breath, yet there was a strange determination in her expression. The mother looked down, slightly concerned. "Honey, no pointing," she murmured. But the child seemed to have her own agenda. Her gaze followed every movement of the dog, and her hand lingered, pointing unwaveringly, as if trying to convey a message only she understood. Other spectators began to notice the child's behavior. Some smiled softly, whispering, "Look at her, so curious," while others scowled slightly, annoyed at what they considered a minor disruption in a serious environment. The lawyers exchanged glances, some amused, some indifferent. The judge, seated high on the bench, did not notice. His attention was on opening statements, his mind entirely occupied with the gravity of the case. Yet, beneath the surface of routine legal formalities, an invisible tension began to form, as if the courtroom itself sensed something unusual was about to occur. The toddler's fascination reached a climax when the police dog tilted its head, responding to some internal cue or scent. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to most people, but not to the child. Her eyes widened, her tiny finger jabbing forward with an instinctive certainty. The mother tightened her hold, worried that something unexpected might happen. But there was no fear in the child's expression, only curiosity, intensity, and an unspoken connection forming between the toddler and the K-9. The room continued its proceedings, voices echoing with legal jargon, papers shuffled, and chairs scraped against the polished floor. Yet in one corner, a silent drama unfolded. A toddler, a police dog, and an almost magical alignment of curiosity and instinct were about to intersect. The child's innocent observation, her tiny gestures, and the dog's trained awareness were converging in ways no one yet understood. What seemed like a mundane courthouse morning was quietly becoming something extraordinary, a prelude to a moment that would soon shock everyone in the room. The toddler, still pointing, murmured something unintelligible, a sound so soft it barely reached anyone. Yet it carried weight, almost as if the universe itself had tuned in to her innocent perception. The mother glanced anxiously at the judge, at the lawyers, at the officers, unsure how this child might impact the proceedings. But deep down, a spark of anticipation flickered in her mind. Something was about to happen, something that would transform an ordinary courtroom morning into an unforgettable story of innocence meeting the extraordinary. And so, the scene was set. A toddler in the arms of her mother, a police dog sitting alert, and a courtroom filled with adults poised on the edge of expectation. All were participants in a story about to unfold. The child's tiny finger, her wide eyes, and her soft whispers would soon trigger a chain of events no one could have predicted. The tension in the room was subtle, but growing, like the calm before a storm. And in that delicate, suspenseful balance, the first seeds of amazement were planted, seeds that would bloom in ways the courthouse had never seen before. The courtroom had settled into the rhythmic hum of proceedings, the voices of lawyers and the occasional gavel striking the bench forming a steady cadence. Yet, amidst this professional monotony, the toddler's attention remained unwavering. Her wide eyes were fixed on the police dog, studying every subtle movement, every twitch of the ears, every shift in posture. It was as if the child were seeing something invisible to everyone else, a secret dance of instinct and awareness that the adults could not comprehend. She clutched her stuffed bunny tightly, holding it almost like a protective talisman, yet she seemed more focused on the living presence before her than on her toy, the police dog. A large Belgian Malinois with a sleek, muscular frame sat like a statue near the officer. Its dark eyes swept the room, nostrils flaring subtly, as if sampling the scent of every person and every object around it. The dog's training was impeccable, trained to detect narcotics, explosives, and respond to subtle behavioral cues, but today it was meant to be a passive observer. Yet something in the child's gaze seemed to ripple across the room, drawing attention to an otherwise ordinary moment. The toddler's finger pointed slightly, trembling ever so lightly with the intensity of her focus. Her mother noticed the intensity in her child's expression. "Sweetie, just watch quietly, okay?" she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from the toddler's forehead. The child nodded, or at least gave the semblance of nodding, though her gaze never left the dog. There was a seriousness in her wide eyes that made her mother pause for a moment, a strange feeling of awe mingled with concern. In the back of her mind, she wondered how much the toddler was actually noticing. It seemed impossible that a 2-year-old could grasp anything of consequence in a room full of legal adults. Yet the child's focus suggested otherwise. Around them, the courtroom's ambience shifted subtly. Lawyers flipped through documents with meticulous care, occasionally glancing toward the canine unit with professional curiosity, though none imagined the child's silent observation mattered. Officers noted the slight movements of the dog, its ears twitching, its body leaning subtly forward, subtle signs that were easy to miss unless one knew what to look for. Journalists whispered into recorders, capturing the formal proceedings, unaware that the most captivating story might be unfolding in the corner where the toddler sat. Spectators exchanged occasional glances at the child, smiling at the curiosity of youth, but dismissing it as simple innocence. Yet the child seemed attuned to something deeper. Her tiny lips moved, barely audible murmurs escaping as if forming sentences only she could understand. "Doggy, there," she whispered once, her finger steady. Her mother leaned closer, unsure whether to shush or allow the expression of curiosity. A child's fascination was unmistakable. She was engaged in a silent conversation with the canine, an unspoken understanding that transcended words. The room continued with its legal monotony, oblivious to the subtle drama unfolding quietly in its midst. The police dog, trained for sensitivity to environmental stimuli, began to show small but noticeable reactions. Its head tilted, ears pivoting toward the toddler, and its tail gave a barely perceptible wag. Officers watched with interest, noting the unusual focus. It was not common for a toddler to capture the attention of a highly trained canine, and yet something about the child's concentrated pointing seemed to trigger the dog's innate instincts. The connection between innocence and trained instinct created a curious tension in the room, unnoticed by many, but palpable to those attuned to subtle cues. The toddler, emboldened by the dog's attention, leaned forward slightly, her soft giggle replaced by a more serious expression. She pointed with deliberate intent now, her gaze locked on a shadow near the corner of the courtroom. Her murmurs grew slightly louder, still unintelligible to the surrounding adults. Yet the combination of gesture and focus created a magnetic pull. Even the officers found themselves glancing at the child, wondering what exactly she had detected. The mother's concern deepened. She had never seen her child so focused, so deliberate, and yet so utterly unaware of the broader context of the room. Across the courtroom, the suspect remained seated, attempting to appear calm, though occasional glances betrayed his unease. He did not notice the child, nor the dog, in any meaningful way, yet something subtle shifted. The atmosphere seemed to change as if charged by the alignment of tiny observations and instinctive responses. Observers could feel the tension rising, a quiet undercurrent that hinted at the extraordinary, even though most were unaware of its cause. It was the calm before the storm, the moment when the ordinary begins to teeter on the edge of remarkable revelation. The judge, oblivious to the silent exchange between child and K9, began reviewing documents related to the day's case. His voice, calm yet commanding, outlined procedural matters, questions for witnesses, and timelines. Lawyers shifted papers, some scribbling notes, others quietly consulting with their clients. Journalists typed away at their keyboards, capturing every detail of testimony and observation. All the while, the toddler continued to point, whisper, and watch, her innocence becoming the quiet fulcrum upon which the tension of the courtroom subtly pivoted. The officers, realizing the toddler's peculiar interaction with the dog, began exchanging discreet glances. One leaned slightly toward another, whispering, "Is it just me? Or is the dog reacting to her?" The other nodded, eyes narrowing. Could be coincidence. Or something else. Keep watching. The dog, sitting obediently, allowed subtle cues to ripple outward. A slight growl, a movement of the paws, a shift in weight, all seemingly meaningless to most, yet powerful in context. The courtroom was unknowingly teetering on the brink of something that could upend routine proceedings entirely. The toddler's gaze remained unwavering, her fingers steady, her whispers persistent. She was oblivious to the gravity of the courtroom, the seriousness of the trial, and the anxious energy that filled the space. To her, this was a simple game of curiosity, an exploration of something large, calm, and majestic. And yet, her innocence was about to intersect with trained instinct in a way that would shock everyone present. It was a rare alignment of childlike perception and professional expertise, an unplanned convergence that hinted at the extraordinary power of observation, untainted by expectation or skepticism. Suddenly, the toddler's tiny lips parted, forming words that were almost too soft to hear, yet imbued with a clarity and certainty that made the mother pause. "They're bad," she whispered, pointing with greater conviction. The mother froze, unsure if she had heard correctly. Her eyes darted to the officers and the dog, who seemed to respond ever so subtly, ears twitching, head turning, and tail giving a gentle wag. The courtroom, still oblivious, continued its rhythm, unaware that the toddler's innocent declaration had just begun a chain of events that would astonish everyone in attendance. And in that moment, the quiet interaction between a child and a police dog set the stage for a remarkable disruption of routine, a fleeting yet powerful reminder that observation and instinct often manifest where least expected. The toddler, unaware of her growing importance in the unfolding drama, continued to watch, to point, to murmur her innocence, becoming a force that no adult in the room could predict or control. The courthouse, steeped in tradition, seriousness, and procedure, had become a theater for an extraordinary collision of intuition and trained instinct. As the opening statements of the trial continued, the toddler remained fixated on the dog, her murmurs growing slightly more defined. Officers, subtle in their movements, observed the alignment of gaze and gesture, a shared awareness forming silently between human, canine, and child. The mother, caught between amusement and unease, whispered once more, "Please just be quiet, honey," though deep down she knew something unusual was unfolding. The courtroom, in all its procedural gravity, was on the cusp of witnessing something that would turn a normal day into an unforgettable story, one that would later be recounted with awe, disbelief, and admiration. The courtroom had settled into the rhythm of routine proceedings, yet an undercurrent of tension had begun to grow. Lawyers shuffled papers with deliberate care, witnesses whispered quietly with their attorneys, and spectators exchanged occasional glances toward the front of the room. Nobody, however, had noticed the extraordinary focus of one small observer in the corner, Toddler, whose wide eyes remained locked on the police dog. Her tiny finger, pointing with unnerving certainty, had already drawn subtle, unacknowledged attention from the officers stationed nearby. Yet the true impact of her presence was about to reveal itself in a moment of astonishing clarity. For the child, the courtroom was a maze of colors, shapes, and strange noises. The polished wooden benches towered above her, while sunlight spilled through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the floor. Voices overlapped in a low murmur of procedural discussion. The toddler's gaze, however, remained unwavering, fixed on the dark, glossy coat of the K9 unit. The dog, sensing the alignment of focus and curiosity, responded in kind. Its ears twitched, tail moved slightly, and it shifted its weight forward, as if acknowledging the child's silent communication. To any adult observer, these were subtle, almost imperceptible movements, but to those paying close attention, they were remarkable. The toddler, emboldened by the dog's reaction, leaned slightly forward on her mother's hip. Her tiny lips parted, and a sound formed soft at first, almost lost in the courtroom's ambient hum. Then, with a clarity that startled even her own mother, she spoke the words that would freeze the room in disbelief. "Bad guy." The effect was instantaneous. The murmurs of the spectators halted mid-sentence. Journalists' pens froze over notepads, cameras clicked sharply in reflexive reaction, and even the judge paused, eyes narrowing as he processed what he had just heard. A room accustomed to legal jargon, motions, and the careful, practiced speech of adults had been pierced by the unfiltered observation of a 2-year-old. The words were simple, just 2 syllables, but they carried a precision that no one could ignore. The mother's heart leapt in her chest, a mixture of pride, shock, and anxiety coursing through her. She tightened her grip on her daughter, whispering softly, "Honey, What did you say?" But the toddler, oblivious to the chaos she had initiated, only pointed more insistently at the dog. Her eyes sparkled with the thrill of discovery, entirely unaware that her 2 words had become the catalyst for a courtroom-wide reaction. Lawyers exchanged astonished glances. The prosecuting attorney, usually composed and calculating, froze mid-sentence. The defense attorney's jaw tightened as his gaze flicked toward the child, then toward the K9. He had no idea how to process what had just occurred. Witnesses whispered to each other, some stifling smiles, others attempting to rationalize the extraordinary moment. The officers, highly trained and accustomed to the unexpected, leaned subtly toward one another. One muttered under his breath, "Did she just?" The other simply nodded, eyes still fixed on the dog. The police dog, trained to respond to environmental stimuli and behavioral cues, shifted noticeably. Its ears perked higher, its nose twitched, and a low, restrained growl emerged, a signal indicating detection, interest, and readiness. The dog's reaction, when coupled with the toddler's words, created a scene of unprecedented synchronicity. For anyone observing without context, it might have appeared coincidental or whimsical. But for those attuned to law enforcement procedure and canine behavior, the alignment of instincts was extraordinary. The toddler had, in a sense, become a silent partner in observation. The judge, regaining composure, cleared his throat. "Order in the courtroom," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of incredulity. "Everyone, please remain seated and focus on the proceedings." His gaze flicked toward the mother and child, noting the toddler's intense focus. He could not yet comprehend the significance of the moment, but a subtle tension lingered in the air, as if the universe had quietly shifted in that small corner of the room. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, curiosity and disbelief rippling through the audience. Some whispered speculatively, "Did she just say what I think she said?" While others laughed softly, dismissing it as the whimsical musings of a child. Yet a handful of observers, those familiar with the seriousness of the case and the precision of canine training, felt a chill of anticipation. Something about the child's words, delivered with clarity and conviction, suggested an alignment that transcended coincidence. The toddler's finger remained pointed at the police dog. She repeated the words softly, "Bad guy." The simplicity of the phrase belied its profound impact. The officers watching the scene shared subtle nods, a silent acknowledgement of what had just occurred. Their professional training allowed them to recognize the significance of canine reactions, body language, and environmental cues. And now, a toddler had added a human element to the detection process, a factor entirely unpredictable, yet remarkably effective. The room seemed to hold its breath. Journalists whispered into recorders, scribbled notes, and exchanged glances of disbelief. The lawyers, still stunned, consulted quickly with their colleagues, debating whether this minor interruption could be relevant or whether it was merely a moment of innocent coincidence. Spectators, meanwhile, murmured among themselves, some chuckling at the unexpected drama, others leaning closer to witness the unfolding story. Even the bailiffs seemed momentarily distracted, their rigid postures softening as they observed the extraordinary interaction. The mother, her face a mixture of amusement and concern, whispered to her daughter, "Sweetie, that's enough now." But the toddler, entirely focused, continued to point, her gaze unwavering. It was clear she had noticed something that had caught the attention of the highly trained police dog, and now, indirectly, the entire courtroom. Her innocence, combined with instinctive perception, had transformed a mundane trial into a spectacle of anticipation and suspense. The officers, now fully alert, subtly guided the dog toward the corner of the room where the toddler had been pointing. The dog obeyed with quiet precision, every movement controlled yet purposeful. Its nose twitched, tail shifted, and ears tilted forward. Observers held their breath as the dog approached a small, unattended briefcase near the suspect's seat. The child's soft words, "Bad guy," echoed faintly in the air, aligning with the dog's behavior in a moment of eerie synchronicity. Whispers grew louder in the courtroom. "What's happening? Is the dog reacting to the child? Did she just point out something important?" Even the judge's eyes widened slightly, a rare crack in his normally unflappable demeanor. Lawyers paused their arguments, scribbling notes furiously, attempting to understand the chain of events now unfolding before them. The alignment of a toddler's words and a police dog's instinct was a scene few could have predicted. And then, in a quiet, almost cinematic moment, the dog emitted a controlled growl and backed slightly toward the briefcase. The toddler's finger remained pointed, unwavering. The mother's breath caught in her throat. Spectators leaned forward. Lawyers froze. Even the journalists held their pens in midair, anticipating what might come next. The courtroom, in its centuries-old formality, had become a stage for a tiny child and a trained canine to demonstrate a subtle yet undeniable truth. Intuition, perception, and innocence can intersect with precision and training in ways no one could foresee. The toddler, oblivious to the gravity of her actions, whispered once more, "Bad guy." The repetition, innocent in tone yet precise in delivery, seemed to trigger a ripple of recognition. The police dog's tail gave a definitive wag, its ears stiffened, and its body shifted into a posture of alert readiness. The officers exchanged a quick, subtle glance, realizing that the child's observation and the dog's reaction had aligned perfectly. What had started as simple curiosity was now revealing itself as a moment of unexpected significance. It was a pause that held the courtroom in suspended disbelief. In that fleeting moment, adults accustomed to strategy, deliberation, and calculated reasoning had to reckon with the unfiltered power of childlike perception. The toddler had, in a single phrase, captured the attention of everyone in the room, including the dog trained for detecting threats and the adults responsible for interpreting the unfolding events. The courtroom had become a theater of suspense, with the tiniest participant at the center of the unfolding drama. And in that moment, the first ripple of change had begun. A child's 2 words, simple yet profound, had shifted the rhythm of the courtroom, drawing attention to a previously unnoticed detail and setting the stage for a revelation that would astonish everyone. The room held its collective breath, waiting, wondering, and quietly acknowledging that something extraordinary was underway, a moment that none of them would ever forget. The courtroom had gone silent, the hum of legal proceedings replaced by a tension so thick it was almost tangible. Every person in the room felt it, even if they couldn't explain why. The toddler's 2 simple words, "bad guy," had pierced the carefully constructed veil of seriousness, cutting through the legal jargon and formalities like a lightning strike. The K-9 unit, alert and responsive, now became the center of attention. Its head lifted slightly, ears pivoting toward the source of focus, the child. Its nose twitched, sampling the air, and a low, restrained growl vibrated from its chest, signaling detection. The officers, trained to recognize subtle cues from their canine partners, leaned forward subtly. One whispered to another, his voice low and calm, "She may have just pointed out something. We need to check." The other nodded, eyes locked on the dog, noticing its behavior. The Malinois shifted slightly, its powerful frame tensing as though preparing for a signal it would soon receive. The alignment of the toddler's curiosity and the dog's instinct was astonishing, a silent choreography of awareness unfolding quietly but powerfully. The toddler, oblivious to the tension she had caused, continued to point. Her tiny finger trembled with determination, and her soft murmurs became slightly louder, almost deliberate. "There. Bad guy." She leaned closer, eyes wide with fascination. The mother, a mixture of pride and anxiety washing over her, whispered, "Honey, shoo. Be quiet now." But the toddler was captivated, locked in an intuitive communication with the dog, an unspoken language of attention and instinct. Across the courtroom, the suspect shifted in his seat, unaware of the toddler's growing significance. He attempted to maintain a calm demeanor, but his eyes flicked repeatedly toward the corner, where the toddler and the canine had silently aligned their focus. There was something in the child's conviction, combined with the dog's trained alertness, that made him uneasy. Subtle perspiration dotted his forehead. The tension in the room grew, a quiet but powerful suspense that rippled through the air like static before a storm. Officers subtly directed the dog toward a particular area near the front of the courtroom. The canine obeyed with precision, moving with a fluid, almost silent grace. Its nose twitched constantly, nostrils flaring as it sampled the air, ears alert, body coiled with readiness. Each movement was calculated, controlled, yet full of intent. The toddler's finger remained fixed on the same spot, unwavering in its direction. Spectators noticed the subtle interplay between child and canine, whispers spreading like wildfire. "Look at the dog. It's reacting. Is she pointing something out?" Lawyers paused mid-conversation, witnesses leaned forward in their seats, and journalists fumbled to record what was happening. The courtroom's official rhythm had been disrupted, replaced by the unscripted drama of instinct and observation. The child, small and seemingly fragile, had inadvertently become the catalyst for a chain of events that no adult had anticipated. Her words and gestures, combined with the dog's reactions, were creating a new, extraordinary dynamic that demanded attention. The police dog approached a specific area near the defendant's briefcase. Its tail stiffened, giving a controlled wag, and its growl grew slightly louder, a signal of alertness and focus. The officers exchanged glances, realizing the alignment of the toddler's observation, and the dog's response was not merely coincidence. The child's pointing had unintentionally directed law enforcement's attention to a potential point of interest, a subtle clue that could alter the course of the courtroom proceedings. The toddler, fascinated, leaned slightly forward on her mother's hip. Her small voice, still soft, murmured the words again. Bad guy. She didn't understand the gravity of her statement, the ripple it had created, or the chain reaction it had set in motion. She only knew she was pointing at something important, and that the dog seemed to agree. Her innocence had created a bridge between perception and trained instinct, a connection that no one could have predicted. The courtroom grew increasingly tense. Spectators whispered among themselves, some questioning what they were witnessing. Lawyers whispered to colleagues, debating whether this interaction could hold relevance or was merely a whimsical coincidence. The judge, leaning back slightly in his chair, raised an eyebrow but remained silent, observing the subtle drama playing out before him. Even the most seasoned courtroom attendees felt a rare, inexplicable anticipation, as if the ordinary was being eclipsed by the extraordinary. The police dog now crouched slightly, tail raised, nose inches from the briefcase. Its focus was absolute. The officers followed the dog's lead, observing its behavior without intervening, understanding that the canine's instincts could reveal critical information. The alignment of child and dog was mesmerizing. The toddler's pointing and murmuring, the dog's trained response, and the courtroom's stunned silence combined into a moment of profound tension and suspense. Toddler's mother glanced nervously at the officers, whispering, "I think she's trying to tell you something." The lead officer gave a subtle nod, eyes never leaving the dog. They recognized that the child's instincts, though untrained, were aligned with the canine's behavior in a way that demanded careful attention. The police dog's reactions, growls, movements, postural shifts were precise indicators of detection and awareness. And now, guided by the toddler's innocent yet focused gestures, they were converging on a point of interest. The suspect, sensing the subtle shift in attention, tensed. His hands fidgeted slightly, his eyes darting toward the K-9 unit. He tried to remain composed, but the subtle signals from the dog, combined with the pointed finger of a small child, unnerved him. There was an uncanny precision in the alignment of perception between toddler and canine, an unexpected partnership that seemed to bypass the structured logic of the courtroom and operate on instinct and intuition alone. The journalists, sensing the magnitude of the moment, leaned forward, snapping photos and typing quickly. They whispered among themselves, debating how to describe the unfolding scene. Spectators murmured, some awed, some incredulous, unable to comprehend how a toddler and a dog could hold the attention of a room filled with adults, engaged in serious legal proceedings. The air was thick with anticipation, every eye tracing the subtle movements of the child and the canine in a synchronized display of focus. Toddler's murmurs continued, barely audible yet deliberate. Bad guy. Each repetition reinforced the connection between child and dog. The police officers subtly shifted their positions, allowing the dog greater freedom to investigate the area indicated by the toddler's unwavering finger. The briefcase, innocuous to most, had become the focal point of this unusual alliance. The child's intuition, amplified by the dog's trained instincts, was about to bring hidden details into the light. Finally, the K-9 unit sat back slightly, tail wagging in a controlled, precise manner, and let out a soft growl of alert acknowledgement. The officers exchanged subtle nods, understanding that the toddler's pointing had not been random. The dog's behavior confirmed that there was indeed something significant in the area the child had indicated. What had begun as innocent curiosity was now a catalyst for revelation, a convergence of innocence and expertise that none in the courtroom could have foreseen. The mother held her daughter close, whispering reassurance, though her eyes betrayed awe and apprehension. The toddler, unaware of the weight of her actions, continued to watch the dog with fascination, murmuring softly. The courtroom remained tense, spectators leaning forward, lawyers scribbling notes, and the judge observing with raised eyebrows. The alignment of perception between a toddler and a highly trained canine had, transformed the ordinary courtroom into a theater of suspense and quiet anticipation. And in that moment, the realization began to dawn on everyone present. The combination of innocence, observation, and trained instinct had created a rare, almost miraculous scenario. A toddler's simple curiosity, manifested in 2 small words and a pointing finger, had drawn attention to a detail that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. The police dog's precise reaction confirmed the validity of the child's focus, solidifying a moment that would soon shock the entire courtroom and leave an indelible mark on the story of the trial. The courtroom had shifted from procedural monotony to an almost electric suspense. The toddler's tiny voice, repeating the words "bad guy," combined with the police dog's focused reaction, had captured the attention of everyone in the room. A murmur of spectators escalated to low whispers, and some could no longer resist leaning forward to witness the extraordinary alignment unfolding before them. Even the most seasoned lawyers paused mid-conversation, papers half flipped, pens frozen in midair. Something remarkable was happening, and the normal rhythm of the courtroom had been disrupted entirely. The mother held her daughter tightly, her heart racing. She had anticipated curiosity, perhaps a slight distraction, but nothing of this magnitude. Her child's innocent gestures, pointing, murmuring, leaning, had somehow drawn the attention of the police dog, which now stood alert near a small briefcase at the front of the room. Officers exchanged subtle glances, recognizing the convergence of child and canine as something unusual, possibly critical. The toddler's actions, untrained and entirely instinctive, had become a pivot point for the courtroom's focus. Spectators whispered feverishly, "Is that a police dog reacting to a child?" One murmured. Another whispered back, "I've never seen anything like it." The journalists, sensing a story far larger than routine legal proceedings, typed furiously and adjusted cameras. Their voices were soft, but their excitement palpable. Even those who had dismissed the child's presence as a cute distraction now leaned forward, aware that something unprecedented was occurring before their very eyes. The judge, normally an unflappable presence, paused mid-instruction. He surveyed the room with sharp eyes, noting the sudden hush and the unusual focus on a corner of the courtroom. "Order," he called again, though his tone carried a subtle undertone of incredulity. "Please, everyone, remain seated and let the proceedings continue." Even as he spoke, he couldn't ignore the unusual interaction, the toddler pointing, the dog's alert stance, and the suspect's subtle signs of unease. Something about the alignment of these elements demanded attention. The canine unit, trained to detect threats or evidence, remained focused near the indicated area. Its growl was soft, controlled, a signal of detection rather than aggression. Officers had learned to interpret these subtle cues over years of experience. Now, guided by a tiny child's instinctive observation, they were reassessing the surroundings. The briefcase, previously considered unremarkable, became a focal point. Every movement of the dog, synchronized with the toddler's pointing, heightened the tension. The suspect shifted in his seat, fingers nervously fidgeting. He attempted to maintain composure, but the subtle cues from both toddler and dog unnerved him. He glanced repeatedly toward the corner where the alignment had occurred, hoping the scrutiny would pass. However, every subtle movement from the dog seemed to reinforce the child's attention, a silent accusation he could not ignore. The courtroom's tension radiated outward, touching everyone present with a sense of suspense and anticipation. Officers approached subtly, maintaining a professional distance to avoid alarming the room. The dog's attention never wavered, nose twitching, ears alert, tail giving controlled signals. The alignment between child and canine created a spectacle of quiet precision. The toddler, still whispering softly, now repeated her phrase with slightly greater clarity. "Bad guy." Each word was deliberate, yet innocent, a sharp contrast to the gravity of the courtroom proceedings. The murmurs of the audience escalated. Spectators whispered rapidly, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. "That child." Pointing at the dog? One asked, disbelief evident in her tone. "I think she's saying something important," replied another, eyes wide. The journalists, sensing the narrative unfolding before them, snapped photos and adjusted cameras, knowing that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would be recounted far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Lawyers now turned their attention to the scene as well. The prosecuting attorney whispered to colleagues, debating whether the child's words and gestures could be relevant to the case. The defense attorney's eyes narrowed, a mix of irritation and concern crossing his features. The room, previously governed by strict procedure, had been subtly hijacked by a toddler and a K-9 unit, a combination no one had anticipated. Even the most experienced courtroom attendees felt a rare and exhilarating tension, suspended between disbelief and awe. The mother whispered softly to her child, "Honey, that's enough now. Let's be quiet." But the toddler, entirely captivated, continued to point. She leaned forward slightly, her wide eyes locked on the dog as if communicating silently. Her soft words persisted, the repetition forming an unbroken thread of focus. She did not understand the significance of her actions, the way her observation had aligned with the dog's instinct, or the ripple of attention she had triggered. To her, it was simply a game of fascination, an exploration of the majestic and alert creature before her. Meanwhile, the officers discreetly guided the K-9 unit closer to the briefcase. Its body language indicated recognition, alertness, and subtle readiness. Every movement, every twitch of the nose, every shift of weight was a silent communication that spoke volumes to trained eyes. The courtroom, previously alive with routine legal chatter, now held its collective breath, aware that something extraordinary was unfolding. The child's words, the dog's reaction, and the suspect's unease had transformed a typical morning trial into a spectacle of suspense and intrigue. Spectators. Reactions varied, some whispered in disbelief. Others laughed nervously, still others stared, awestruck. Lawyers attempted to regain composure, flipping through papers and consulting quietly. But their focus continually drifted back to the alignment between toddler and dog. Even the bailiffs, trained to maintain order and control, found themselves intrigued by the unusual dynamics. Cameras captured the scene in near real time, documenting a moment that defied normal expectations of courtroom behavior. The toddler's whispers became slightly more defined, repeating the words, "Bad guy," with deliberate emphasis. Her finger continued to point unwaveringly, and her gaze held a strange intensity. It was as if she were guiding the dog, providing insight through her innocent observation. The K-9 unit responded with precise attention, tail stiffening slightly, ears flicking, nose twitching, every movement signaling detection. The convergence of childlike instinct and professional training was now undeniable. The courtroom's ambient tension escalated. Spectators leaned forward, some holding their breath. Journalists typed quickly, capturing the narrative in words, photos, and video. Lawyers whispered urgently, debating the implications. The judge observed closely, intrigued despite himself. He realized that this was no ordinary courtroom disruption. This was a moment of unpredicted clarity and revelation, orchestrated by the simple yet astonishing combination of toddler perception and canine instinct. Finally, the officers, guided subtly by the child's gestures and the dog's reactions, directed the K-9 unit to inspect the briefcase more closely. The dog's posture indicated clear recognition, alert, precise, and controlled. The audience, sensing the moment, watched with bated breath. The alignment of innocent curiosity and professional training had created a rare scenario, one in which the unassuming actions of a child could influence the perception and decisions of law enforcement in real time. The mother whispered reassurance again, but her eyes betrayed awe. She had never seen her child behave with such intensity or precision, entirely unaware that her tiny voice and steady finger were about to catalyze a critical moment in the trial. The toddler's actions, innocent and instinctive, had become an unspoken guide for the professionals in the room, aligning perception with trained expertise in a way that transcended ordinary expectation. Not in that quiet but charged moment, the courtroom was alive with suspense. The toddler, the police dog, and the briefcase had become the focal points of attention. Lawyers, officers, journalists, and spectators alike watched in stunned anticipation, aware that something extraordinary was occurring before their very eyes. The mundane had become extraordinary, and the ordinary proceedings of a courthouse morning had been transformed into a theater of suspense, curiosity, and unanticipated revelation. And so, the toddler remained perched on her mother's hip, pointing, whispering, and observing, while the K-9 unit responded with trained precision. The courtroom was silent now, every eye riveted on the interaction, every mind aware that the child's simple words, "bad guy," and gestures had initiated a chain of events that might forever alter the proceedings of the trial. The tension, palpable and unrelenting, held the room in a collective anticipation that would soon break in ways no one could yet imagine. The courtroom remained frozen in an unusual tension. Every eye in the room was drawn to the subtle dance between the toddler and the police dog. The officers, recognizing the seriousness of the alignment, began a careful, deliberate investigation. Their movements were precise, measured, and almost imperceptible to the rest of the spectators. The toddler, still perched on her mother's hip, continued pointing toward the area near the briefcase. Her soft whispers, "bad guy," were repeated in rhythm, her tiny voice carrying a conviction that defied her age. The lead officer gave a subtle nod to his colleagues. "Approach carefully. Minimal disturbance," he whispered. The K-9 unit obeyed, moving slowly and deliberately, nose close to the briefcase. Its ears were perked, tail stiffened, and every muscle in its body was tense with anticipation. Years of training allowed the dog to react subtly, yet with precision, to potential threats or hidden dangers. And now, guided by a toddler's intuitive pointing, the dog was operating in a mode that few humans could predict. Spectators leaned forward, murmuring softly among themselves. Whispers filled the air. Is the dog detecting something? What could a child possibly notice? That briefcase. The murmurs reflected both curiosity and awe. Even seasoned lawyers, trained to assess evidence and witness behavior, could not ignore the tension and precision emerging from the combination of child and canine. Something unusual and perhaps extraordinary was unfolding. The toddler's mother whispered nervously, "Honey, it's okay. Just watch quietly." But the child's focus was absolute. She had no understanding of the consequences of her actions. Her pointing was instinctive, her words simple, yet her perception had triggered a chain of events that the courtroom could not have anticipated. The toddler's innocence was now intertwined with professional vigilance, creating a unique partnership that elevated the ordinary to extraordinary. Police dog's nose twitched violently as it drew closer to the briefcase. The subtle growl emanating from the canine's chest intensified slightly, not a sound of aggression, but a signal of detection and awareness. The officers remained calm, reading the dog's body language with practiced expertise. One officer leaned slightly closer, examining the briefcase without touching it, noting the subtle reactions of the K-9. Every sniff, every movement, and every shift in posture was an unspoken communication, a silent dialogue between dog, officer, and surprisingly, a toddler. Spectators whispered urgently now, some craning their necks to see the briefcase more clearly. Journalists clicked photos and typed furiously, recognizing that they were documenting something remarkable. Lawyers, witnesses, and even bailiffs remained still, aware that the ordinary flow of proceedings had been paused by an unanticipated observation. The courtroom had transformed into a scene of suspense, and the alignment of child, dog, and law enforcement had become the central narrative. The toddler repeated her words again, soft yet deliberate. Bad guy. Her tiny finger remained extended, unwavering. The mother's eyes were wide, a mix of awe and fear. She whispered again, "Sweetie, be quiet now." But the toddler was completely absorbed, leaning forward as though she could somehow communicate her observation more clearly. It was a scene of pure, unfiltered curiosity, a 2-year-old attempting, in her own way, to participate in the investigation. The lead officer made a discreet hand signal to a colleague. The briefcase, still untouched, was now being examined with extreme care. Gloves were slipped on, and the officer's fingers moved lightly over the edges, careful not to disturb anything inside. The dog remained poised, ears swiveling, body tense, a silent sentinel guiding the process. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, recognizing that this was a pivotal moment in the trial that none had anticipated. The suspect shifted in his chair, his composure faltering for the first time. His eyes flicked repeatedly toward the corner where the toddler had pointed and where the canine now stood alert. He tried to remain calm, but the subtle pressure of observation was unmistakable. His palms grew clammy, and a faint sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. The alignment of child and canine had created a psychological weight that was impossible to ignore. The officers carefully unzipped the briefcase, revealing its contents without disturbing the overall structure. Papers, folders, and a small sealed envelope lay inside. The dog sniffed each item meticulously, growling softly near the envelope, signaling a detection that required human attention. The lead officer carefully retrieved the envelope, holding it up for observation, and then gave a subtle nod to his colleagues. The toddler's pointing, her words, and the dog's trained instincts had converged to uncover a detail that might otherwise have been overlooked. Spectators gasped softly. Some whispered incredulously. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances. Journalists scribbled and typed feverishly, cameras capturing every angle. Lawyers leaned forward, murmuring among themselves in rapid consultation. Even the judge, who prided himself on impartial observation, paused mid-document review, his attention now fully on the unfolding scene. What had started as an innocent moment of curiosity was now an integral part of the courtroom proceedings. The toddler, still holding her stuffed bunny, seemed to sense the significance of the moment in her own way. Her voice continued to murmur softly, pointing occasionally at the dog, at the briefcase, and even toward the suspect. Her innocence had become an instrument of revelation. The alignment of perception, instinct, and training had created a scenario that was both surreal and compelling. The courtroom had unknowingly been transformed into a stage for a rare, almost miraculous convergence. The lead officer opened the envelope carefully. Inside, hidden beneath layers of ordinary-looking documents, was a small but suspicious item, a device designed for illicit purposes. It was compact, nearly undetectable to the casual observer, yet the dog's instinctive reaction, combined with the toddler's pointing, had identified it. The officers exchanged brief, discreet nods, recognizing the significance of the discovery. A tiny child, unaware of legal procedures, had inadvertently guided them to a critical piece of evidence. The courtroom reacted subtly but noticeably. Spectators murmured and shifted in their seats, sensing the importance of the moment. Journalists whispered excitedly, realizing that they were documenting a story that would capture national attention. Lawyers consulted quietly, evaluating how the discovery might impact the ongoing case. The judge, leaning slightly forward on the bench, observed with a mixture of curiosity, caution, and professional interest. The trial's proceedings had been forever altered by a combination of instinct, intuition, and innocence. The toddler's mother, realizing the magnitude of her child's actions, whispered softly, "Honey, you've done something important." The toddler, oblivious to the gravity, merely giggled, bouncing slightly on her mother's hip. She had no concept of the legal and investigative significance of her pointing or the dog's reactions. Her involvement had been entirely instinctive, a display of pure curiosity and observation. And yet, it had uncovered a hidden threat in a courtroom where adults, bound by procedure and training, might have overlooked it entirely. The officers carefully secured the device, maintaining professional control and minimizing disruption to the trial. The K9 unit, still alert, was guided back to its original position. The toddler, satisfied with the dog's return, finally relaxed slightly, clutching her stuffed bunny and whispering softly, "Doggy good." Her innocent remark was a stark contrast to the serious, high-stakes revelation that had just unfolded. The courtroom remained silent for a few moments, the weight of the discovery settling across the room. In that suspended moment, the courtroom had become a testament to the unexpected power of perception and instinct. A toddler's simple curiosity, a dog's trained responses, and the careful observation of officers had converged to reveal a hidden threat that no one had anticipated. The ordinary had transformed into extraordinary, a seemingly small moment creating ripples that would resonate far beyond the courthouse walls. And so, the trial continued, forever changed. The child, unaware of her role, had become an unlikely hero. The police dog had demonstrated the precision of training, amplified by instinctive guidance. And the courtroom, filled with adults accustomed to control and procedure, had witnessed a moment where innocence, perception, and expertise collided to produce an outcome both unexpected and extraordinary. The courtroom was finally settling back into a semblance of order, though the tension lingered like an electric charge in the air. The discovery of the hidden device, prompted by the toddler's instinctive pointing and reinforced by the K9 unit's trained detection, had changed everything. Lawyers, spectators, and officers alike were still absorbing the gravity of the moment. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward on the bench, realizing that this case would forever be remembered, not for the ordinary proceedings that had begun the morning, but for the extraordinary events that had just unfolded. The lead officer carefully documented every detail of the discovery, making sure that the device was securely stored and that the chain of custody remained intact. The K9 unit, satisfied that its part of the investigation was complete, sat obediently by the officer's side. Its ears flicked occasionally, tail giving controlled signals of alertness, but its role in uncovering the evidence was done. The officers knew that without the dog's precision and the toddler's pointing, the device might have gone unnoticed, a risk that could have had catastrophic consequences. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, murmuring in disbelief and awe. Journalists clicked photos and typed furiously, realizing that the story they were witnessing was unprecedented. Cameras captured every detail: the toddler's tiny finger, the stuffed bunny she still clutched, the focused gaze of the K9, and the officers carefully handling the evidence. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see that child? And the dog so precise. I can't believe this actually happened." The courtroom had become more than a venue for legal proceedings. It had become a stage for an unforgettable drama. The suspect, now fully aware of the implications, sat rigidly in his seat. His attempts at composure faltered as he realized that his carefully concealed actions had been uncovered in an extraordinary way. His eyes darted repeatedly toward the toddler and the K9, as though searching for some explanation he could not find. His lawyers whispered urgently, but even they seemed stunned by the remarkable chain of events. The courtroom's rhythm, once governed by procedure, had been irrevocably transformed by innocence, intuition, and trained instinct. The toddler, blissfully unaware of her pivotal role, continued to murmur softly, "Doggy good." Her mother, filled with pride and disbelief, whispered, "Yes, sweetheart. You did something very important." The simplicity of the child's words contrasted sharply with the high stakes surrounding her. The canine's precise reactions had aligned perfectly with her pointing, guiding law enforcement to a critical piece of evidence. In a courtroom filled with trained professionals, it was the untrained perception of a toddler that had made all the difference. The judge, recognizing the extraordinary circumstances, called for a brief recess to allow officers to complete their documentation and for the courtroom to regain order. "We will pause momentarily," he announced. "The events that have just occurred are unusual and merit careful attention. Please remain seated while we ensure that proceedings can continue appropriately." His tone was formal, but a subtle glimmer of fascination crossed his eyes. Even a figure accustomed to decades of legal proceedings could not ignore the unusual convergence of observation and instinct he had. Witness. Officers moved methodically to secure the evidence. The device, carefully placed in a protective case, was transported for further analysis. The canine unit remained attentive, a silent guardian ensuring that nothing was disturbed. Lawyers consulted quietly with their clients, adjusting their strategies in light of the unexpected discovery. The courtroom, though outwardly composed, hummed with the energy of astonishment. Everyone present understood that what had begun as an ordinary morning session had become something extraordinary, a lesson in perception, instinct, and the power of innocence. When the trial resumed, the atmosphere was different. Spectators sat with heightened attention, aware that even the smallest participant could alter the course of events. Lawyers approached their arguments with careful precision, mindful of the chain of events that had unfolded. The prosecuting attorney referenced the discovery subtly, ensuring that it was part of the official record, while respecting the sensitivity of involving a child in the proceedings. The defense attorney adjusted his approach, aware that the evidence could not be ignored, regardless of its unusual discovery. The toddler, still perched on her mother's hip, occasionally glanced at the canine, whispering softly in quiet fascination. Her presence, though innocent and unassuming, had left a permanent impact on the courtroom. Observers could see it in the way lawyers adjusted their notes, in the officers' careful documentation, and in the judge's thoughtful attention. A moment that had begun as simple curiosity had evolved into a critical turning point. Reminder that sometimes, the smallest observers can see the things adults overlooked. After the formal proceedings concluded for the day, the lead officer approached the mother and child. He knelt slightly to speak at the toddler's level. "You helped us today," he said, voice calm yet warm. "Your pointing and your words, they made a big difference." "Thank you." The toddler, clutching her stuffed bunny, smiled faintly, her small face radiating innocent curiosity. She had no understanding of the legal implications or the potential danger she had helped avert, but her actions had made her a quiet hero. The courtroom buzzed with conversation as spectators and journalists discussed the events. Headlines began forming in whispered speculation. Toddler guides police dog the hidden device in courtroom. Child's 2 words alter trial proceedings, and canine and toddler team uncover critical evidence. The story had captured the imagination of everyone present. A narrative of innocence, perception, and collaboration that transcended the ordinary boundaries of the courtroom. The suspect, now visibly unsettled, realized that the unusual chain of events had sealed a crucial element of the case. His attempts to conceal evidence had been thwarted by the unlikely alliance of a toddler and a canine unit. His lawyers consulted rapidly, preparing to address the implications in legal terms. But the narrative had already shifted irreversibly. The courtroom had witnessed a rare convergence of innocence and trained skill that had left a permanent mark on the proceedings. The judge, addressing the courtroom once more, acknowledged the extraordinary nature of the events without breaking protocol. "Today, we have witnessed something remarkable," he said, voice steady, yet filled with subdued admiration. A small observer, through her curiosity, has demonstrated the power of attention and instinct. Let this serve as a reminder that vigilance and observation can come from unexpected sources. His words echoed in the room, a formal acknowledgement of the toddler's inadvertent heroism. The mother, holding her daughter close, felt a surge of pride and awe. Her child had unknowingly played a pivotal role in an event that would be remembered for years. The toddler's pointing, her soft words, and her natural curiosity had guided trained professionals to a discovery that might have otherwise been missed. It was a moment of pure innocence, achieving profound impact, a reminder that even the smallest participants can have a significant effect on the world around them. The police officers documented the final details and ensured that all evidence was properly handled. The K-9 unit received a well-deserved pat and brief praise, while the toddler watched with wide-eyed fascination. Spectators and journalists filed out slowly, discussing the remarkable events in hushed tones. Every observer recognized the rarity of what they had witnessed. Courtroom transformed by a tiny child's perception and a dog's trained precision. As the day concluded, the story began to spread. News outlets, social media, and word of mouth would recount the extraordinary tale. A toddler, armed with nothing more than observation and instinct, had pointed out a hidden danger. A police dog had reacted with trained precision. Law enforcement had acted decisively, and the courtroom had borne witness to a moment of suspense, revelation, and awe. The narrative was simple yet profound. Innocence and attentiveness can reveal truths that might otherwise remain hidden. The toddler, still clutching her stuffed bunny, whispered softly once more, "Doggy good?" Her words, simple and innocent, punctuated a day of extraordinary events. In her small way, she had altered the course of the trial, guided trained professionals, and demonstrated the value of perception unclouded by expectation or preconception. The courtroom, and all who had witnessed it, would not soon forget the quiet heroism of a child who had simply pointed and spoken 2 words. The final lesson of the day settled over the courthouse like a soft, invisible wave. Adults, trained professionals, and seasoned observers realized that insight and revelation can come from unexpected places. The collaboration of innocence and expertise, perception and training, had created a moment of clarity and action that transcended normal expectations. In the end, the toddler had reminded everyone present that sometimes the smallest, most unassuming voices can have the greatest impact. The courtroom was finally settling back into a semblance of order, though the tension lingered like an electric charge in the air. The discovery of the hidden device, prompted by the toddler's instinctive pointing and reinforced by the K-9 unit's trained detection, had changed everything. Lawyers, spectators, and officers alike were still absorbing the gravity of the moment. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward on the bench, realizing that this case would forever be remembered, not for the ordinary proceedings that had begun the morning, but for the extraordinary events that had just unfolded. The lead officer carefully documented every detail of the discovery, making sure that the device was securely stored and that the chain of custody remained intact. The K-9 unit, satisfied that its part of the investigation was complete, sat obediently by the officer's side. Its ears flicked occasionally, tail giving controlled signals of alertness, but its role in uncovering the evidence was done. The officers knew that without the dog's precision and the toddler's pointing, the device might have gone unnoticed, a risk that could have had catastrophic consequences. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, murmuring in disbelief and awe. Journalists clicked photos and typed furiously, realizing that the story they were witnessing was unprecedented. Cameras captured every detail, The toddler's tiny finger, the stuffed bunny she still clutched, the focused gaze of the canine, and the officers carefully handling the evidence. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see that child? And the dog so precise. I can't believe this actually happened." The courtroom had become more than a venue for legal proceedings. It had become a stage for an unforgettable drama. The suspect, now fully aware of the implications, sat rigidly in his seat. His attempts at composure faltered as he realized that his carefully concealed actions had been uncovered in an extraordinary way. His eyes darted repeatedly toward the toddler and the canine, as though searching for some explanation he could not find. His lawyers whispered urgently, but even they seemed stunned by the remarkable chain of events. The courtroom's rhythm, once governed by procedure, had been irrevocably transformed by innocence, intuition, and trained instinct. The toddler, blissfully unaware of her pivotal role, continued to murmur softly, "Doggy good." Her mother, filled with pride and disbelief, whispered, "Yes, sweetheart. You did something very important." The simplicity of the child's words contrasted sharply with the high stakes surrounding her. The canine's precise reactions had aligned perfectly with her pointing, guiding law enforcement to a critical piece of evidence. In a courtroom filled with trained professionals, it was the untrained perception of a toddler that had made all the difference. The judge, recognizing the extraordinary circumstances, called for a brief recess to allow officers to complete their documentation and for the courtroom to regain order. "We will pause momentarily," he announced. "The events that have just occurred are unusual and merit careful attention. Please remain seated while we ensure that proceedings can continue appropriately." His tone was formal, but a subtle glimmer of fascination crossed his eyes. Even a figure accustomed to decades of legal proceedings could not ignore the unusual convergence of observation and instinct he had. Witness. Officers moved methodically to secure the evidence. The device, carefully placed in a protective case, was transported for further analysis. The canine unit remained attentive, a silent guardian ensuring that nothing was disturbed. Lawyers consulted quietly with their clients, adjusting their strategies in light of the unexpected discovery. The courtroom, though outwardly composed, hummed with the energy of astonishment. Everyone present understood that what had begun as an ordinary morning session had become something extraordinary, a lesson in perception, instinct, and the power of innocence. When the trial resumed, the atmosphere was different. Spectators sat with heightened attention, aware that even the smallest participant could alter the course of events. Lawyers approached their arguments with careful precision, mindful of the chain of events that had unfolded. The prosecuting attorney referenced the discovery subtly, ensuring that it was part of the official record, while respecting the sensitivity of involving a child in the proceedings. The defense attorney adjusted his approach, aware that the evidence could not be ignored, regardless of its unusual discovery. The toddler, still perched on her mother's hip, occasionally glanced at the canine, whispering softly in quiet fascination. Her presence, though innocent and unassuming, had left a permanent impact on the courtroom. Observers could see it in the way lawyers adjusted their notes, in the officers' careful documentation, and in the judge's thoughtful attention. A moment that had begun as simple curiosity had evolved into a critical turning point. Reminder that sometimes the smallest observers can see the things adults overlooked. After the formal proceedings concluded for the day, the lead officer approached the mother and child. He knelt slightly to speak at the toddler's level. "You helped us today," he said, voice calm yet warm. "Your pointing and your words, they made a big difference." "Thank you." The toddler, clutching her stuffed bunny, smiled faintly, her small face radiating innocent curiosity. She had no understanding of the legal implications or the potential danger she had helped avert, but her actions had made her a quiet hero. The courtroom buzzed with conversation as spectators and journalists discussed the events. Headlines began forming in whispered speculation. Toddler guides police dog, the hidden device in courtroom. Child's 2 words alter trial proceedings, and K9 and Toddler. Team uncover critical evidence. The story had captured the imagination of everyone present. A narrative of innocence, perception, and collaboration that transcended the ordinary boundaries of the courtroom. The suspect, now visibly unsettled, realized that the unusual chain of events had sealed a crucial element of the case. His attempts to conceal evidence had been thwarted by the unlikely alliance of a toddler and a K9 unit. His lawyers consulted rapidly, preparing to address the implications in legal terms. But the narrative had already shifted irreversibly. The courtroom had witnessed a rare convergence of innocence and trained skill that had left a permanent mark on the proceedings. The judge, addressing the courtroom once more, acknowledged the extraordinary nature of the events without breaking protocol. "Today, we have witnessed something remarkable," he said, voice steady, yet filled with subdued admiration. A small observer, through her curiosity, has demonstrated the power of attention and instinct. Let this serve as a reminder that vigilance and observation can come from unexpected sources. His words echoed in the room, a formal acknowledgement of the toddler's inadvertent heroism. The mother, holding her daughter close, felt a surge of pride and awe. Her child had unknowingly played a pivotal role in an event that would be remembered for years. The toddler's pointing, her soft words, and her natural curiosity had guided trained professionals to a discovery that might have otherwise been missed. It was a moment of pure innocence, achieving profound impact, a reminder that even the smallest participants can have a significant effect on the world around them. The police officers documented the final details and ensured that all evidence was properly handled. The K9 unit received a well-deserved pat and brief praise, while the toddler watched with wide-eyed fascination. Spectators and journalists filed out slowly, discussing the remarkable events in hushed tones. Every observer recognized the rarity of what they had witnessed. Courtroom transformed by a tiny child's perception and a dog's trained precision. As the day concluded, the story began to spread. News outlets, social media, and word of mouth would recount the extraordinary tale. A toddler, armed with nothing more than observation and instinct, had pointed out a hidden danger. A police dog had reacted with trained precision. Law enforcement had acted decisively, and the courtroom had borne witness to a moment of suspense, revelation, and awe. The narrative was simple yet profound. Innocence and attentiveness can reveal truths that might otherwise remain hidden. The toddler, still clutching her stuffed bunny, whispered softly once more, "Doggy good?" Her words, simple and innocent, punctuated a day of extraordinary events. In her small way, she had altered the course of the trial, guided trained professionals, and demonstrated the value of perception, unclouded by expectation or preconception. The courtroom, and all who had witnessed it, would not soon forget the quiet heroism of a child who had simply pointed and spoken 2 words. The final lesson of the day settled over the courthouse like a soft, invisible wave. Adults, trained professionals, and seasoned observers realized that insight and revelation can come from unexpected places. The collaboration of innocence and expertise, perception and training, had created a moment of clarity and action that transcended normal expectations. In the end, the toddler had reminded everyone present that sometimes the smallest, most unassuming voices can have the greatest impact.